Hello, friends. Just wait for some time for the rest of us to join in and then we'll start. Hi, Rohi. How are you?
Mike, I'm good. What about you?
Yeah, I'm doing good as well. Thank you. Long time actually because of a project which was ongoing. I could not find time.
Oh, okay, no issues.
We'll wait for 1 minute, then let's get started. Yeah, I'll be on mute. Okay. I'm not seeing anyone else joining in. Let's just start. Let me share my screen. Okay. So until the last session that which we have had, we started to look into the support vector machine side of things, but it has been too long. Last session has been done on 7th of Jan, as you can still see in this notebook. Let me just do one thing. Give me 1 minute. This should be 124, and this will be 3rd of March. So I'll do one thing. I'll quickly go through the basics once more. Yeah, I'll quickly go through the basics once more. A quick revision will be there. We already have the video of the last session which we had. So I'll just quickly go through it once and then we can start with the use case. Okay. So what we were learning, let me just change my pen color. So related to SVMs, if you remember, the example which we took was that of two balls. So let's say I have ball one and I have a bigger ball, ball two. Okay. So if there is a person who is standing over here, okay, and this person is asked to look at this ball, so he's looking at this ball. The thing is, from his point of view, from his viewpoint, he can only look at, let's say, approximately some portion of the ball, which I can say, let's say, 47%, let's say 48% of the ball, because the rest of the ball is actually black box for him, right? From the position where he's standing, let's say the position is P0, he's not able to look at the ball entirely. Of course, that makes sense. Now, if I'm asking that person to look into ball B2 rather than looking at ball B1, then obviously ball B1 is blocking his view at least to this much percentage. If B1 was not there, then he would have looked into ball B2, and a similar kind of percentage of ball B2 would have been visible from his position P0, right? So, had it been the case, ball B1 was not there, he would have seen at least 47 to 48% of the surface area of ball B2 also. But that is not the case. We have B1 in front of B2. So, in this case, hardly, because B1 is also blocking this portion of B2, hardly we can say 30% or let's say 35% of the area will be visible, right? Now, how do we solve this problem? We took a very simple thing. Let's move this person to position 1 or position 2, or we move him to position 3, or we move him to position 4. Now, from any one of these positions, he will be able to see both of the balls with maximum extent. So that's the uh, intent here, or that's the ask over here, that I have to select one place, let's say that place B, P3. I'm going to make this person stand at P3, let's say. And while being at P3, he can look at almost, let's say, 47% or 48% of ball B1 and also 48% of ball B2, right? Which means that this is that place from where the maximum extent or maximum view, okay, of the ball is there, okay, of both the balls. So this becomes the core idea, we said, right? This becomes the core idea behind SVMs, because what we do in case of the support vector machines is that we create hyperplanes, right? We create hyperplanes which are nothing but the decision boundaries. Okay? These are the decision boundaries. Okay, these decision boundaries are going to help us primarily do classification problems. Okay, but SVMs can also be used to do regression problems. Okay, I've not looked into the previous video. I don't really remember if I covered this part or not, but I'll quickly touch base on the regression part of it. But you can say most of the cases are related to classification. How does it do that? I hope until this point in time it is clear, right? If you have any questions, do write it on the chat window. Maybe you can unmute yourself. Sorry. Yeah. So the idea is just to move the person, move the point of view. Okay, change the point of view, and you place that person in that specific point of view (POV) from where you are able to see most of what you want to see. Okay. Now this will be clear when I draw the next set of, let's say, the next set of the visualizations, right? So now what we can say is that, let's say, I have some data and the data looks something like this. So I have two kinds of points. One are these orange points, which are, let's say, coagulated on this side of the plane. And the other is, let's say, this dark red point or maroon kind of point, which are coagulated on this side of the plane. Right. So this is a very easy kind of a classification problem. This problem, the classification problem that we have, let's say we have a classification problem, and I'm going to call it a binary class problem because I have two classes. I can clearly see this is class A, let's say, and this guy here or this set of points are, let's say, class B. Now my point obviously is to ensure that I'm able to do some kind of a prediction. So what am I going to do? In a very simple words, I can do something like this. I'm going to draw hyperplane which looks like this, right? And that hyperplane, I'm going to call this line as hyperplane, and I'm going to revise also why I called it a hyperplane, right? But if I look at it from a two-dimensional kind of a geometry where this is x-axis and this is y-axis, where I should not actually say x-axis and y-axis. Let's say these are two features, f1 and f2. Okay, these are two features in my data. So my data has features f1 and f2. So these are the features in my data. Now, what am I going to do with that? So in a 2D case, this hyperplane is basically a line, and the line is doing what? It is creating a divide. And using this divide, I am able to say whether something belongs to class A or class B. For example, if tomorrow I get a new point which is over here, right? Then because it falls on this side, right, on the class A side of things, as compared to the line, right? So I compare it with the line. I see that this point is on this side. Hence, this point obviously has a very high probability to belong to class A. Hence, I tag this as class A. If else my point was here, right, then I would have tagged this as part of class B, right? Now, the point is, how is this hyperplane created, right? In a very simple scenario like this, what I can say is that I'll just take the eraser for a minute and I'm going to remove these points from here. Right. What I can say is the way this plane is created is that I create something which is also known as a margin. Okay. So a plane is created by means of mathematically calculating a plane or an area, right, which is known as the margin. Okay, this is known as the margin. This part over here is known as the margin, and the reason why we are using some form of math, obviously, some form of math is getting involved into the background, by means of which we are creating this margin, is so that we can create a classifier, because this is a classification problem, right? So the idea is create a classifier where I have maximum margin, right? So that's the objective. I have to increase, let's say the depth or the length of this margin is L of M. So L of M as high as possible, right? Now, obviously, even if I have simple, let's say, data sets like this one, so this data set, I can say it is very simple, right? It is simple because I'm able to clearly bifurcate between the two classes A and B. It is not real life, right? If it is not a real life, or if it is not, I'll not say not a real life, I'll say it is not complex, right? If it is not complex, then the problem is, in this case, it may well be a fact that I'm able to get a margin which has a very good size or a very good depth, right? In this case, I can call my classifier, okay, as a maximum margin classifier. Why? Because I was able to create a classifier, right, where I was able to maximize as much as I could the depth or the area that this margin is really covering, right? But in real life, we are going to have two problems, obviously. So the first problem is that obviously class A and B may not be, okay, may not be so clearly differentiable, right? They will be overlapping. So that's the first point. Secondly, finding very high, let's say, margin. You have to forget my handwriting; it is really bad. Finding very high margin is, let's say, tricky, right? Because in real life cases, what is going to happen is there will be a lot of complexity, which means that, let's say, there are 2 points, P1 and P2. They may be very similar and hence very close to each other when they're plotted on a two-dimensional plane. And that's the reason why, to find a boundary between them, or to find a decision surface between them, which is going to have a lot of margin must be created between P1 and P2. Then this kind of a hard and fast requirement may well be very difficult. So how do we solve this problem? As we already discussed earlier, the solution to problem number 2 is very easy. We forget this idea, okay, or we are able to, or let's say we are going to negotiate. Okay, we are going to negotiate on that idea of finding a maximum margin kind of a classifier, and I'm going to say, okay, if it is, even if it is a maximum margin kind of a classifier, it'll do, right? So I don't mind if this distance is small. I don't mind really. It can be a bit small also. Let's say the margin could have been something like this also. It's okay, as long as I am able to do something else, right? As long as I am able to maintain something else, this is okay for me. Okay, that the margin is small, or let's say the new margin is L hyphen M, and L hyphen M is less than L of M. This situation is okay for me. I can live with it, no issue. Now that's the first problem solved. That's the second problem solved. So what about the first problem? This problem is still there. Now let's try to look at it from a very difficult kind of a scenario, like an example that we took earlier, in which case, well, let me just remove this and try to draw this on the left hand side. Let's say I have two features f1, f2, and I have the data points which are looking like this. If I plot them, right, if I plot them onto a 2D plane, let's say these are the data points. So class A, you can say, is marked by the crosses, and let's say class B is marked by the zeros. If this is the case, then how do you find a straight line? Because irrespective of from where you plot that straight line or the hyperplane, it will always have 50-50 kind of an accuracy. If you look at it, it will never be even close to 100% accurate. It will always be an average model. So the trick we do here, as we discussed earlier, is that we use a trick which is also known as a kernel trick. Okay. And what this kernel trick is going to do is that let me change my point of view, similar to my first example, right? I move that person from point 0 to point 1, then to point 2, and then to point 3, and I had point 4 also. And while being at point number 3, I came to know that, okay, now that person is able to see B1 and B2, these two balls he is able to see at least 48%, which is the maximum viewership or maximum view that this person has attained, right? As opposed to being standing over here where he was only looking at 40% of ball 1 but 30% of ball B2. Now he is able to look at a much higher surface area, right? So here also I'm going to change my point of view. How do you do that? Is that I'm just going to mathematically represent, okay, this data into a higher dimension, right? And I'm going to create a newer dimension. I'm going to call this dimension as Z, and it is going to be some function of the features f1 and f2. Okay, so using some functions, it can be square, it can be log, it can be something that happens internally under the hood. We may or may not want to know this, but it is just a mathematical function. Okay, it is just a mathematical function to represent, okay, the data in higher order. Right, we can say that I'm going to represent my data in higher order, which means that now if I represent the data, it is going to look, or my expectation is it is going to look something like this. If I've done things properly, okay, if I've done the calculations of Z properly, now it is going to look something like this in 3D. So this was 2D, right? And hence I was finding really difficult time to plot my hyperplane, right? Because I was totally confused from where to plot it. Now I have a solution. This is in 3D. Now I've changed the dimensions. I added a new feature, Z, which is a function of f1, f2. And what I can do now is that I can create something, and this is the reason why I called it a hyperplane, is because I can create a plane like this, right? I can now create a plane like this. Let's say that this is my decision plane, or this is my decision boundary, or this is my hyperplane, right? I can call it my hyperplane because now it is a plane in the 3 dimensions. So that's the reason why, as a generic word, we say that it is a hyperplane, irrespective of whether it is in 2D or in 3D. Now that we have represented the data in 3D, now you see we are able to properly classify. If a new point falls on this side, okay, this side of the hyperplane, I'm going to call it, okay, it belongs to class A. And if it falls on the other side, I'm going to call it class B, right? Now the point is, here also you can see, if you look at the margin, I'll take another color. If you look at the margin, look how close at least these 2 points are, right? This point and this point are really close to the plane. And even in case of the O's, this point and this point are really close to the plane, which is making the margin really small. Let's say this is the margin from one side and this is the margin from the other side. So the margin here is very soft. Okay. I have a margin which is soft, which is okay for me because I've already negotiated there, right? It is like negotiating the price of an item. So I've already said that it is okay. I can live with the cases where the margin is soft and I have no problems with that, which is okay with me. So it's not going to be a problem. But what about these points which are very, very close? These points are actually going to be my friends. These are going to be my friends. The points which are the points which are too close or lies on top of the margin, right, are called are also called support vectors, right? These are known as support vectors. Okay, these support vectors, I'm going to give them one more name. They are going to be my references, right? They are going to be my references, or they are going to be my friends. Just like if I want to go to a restaurant and I expect that there is a foodie friend of mine who may have gone to that restaurant, so why not I go to that friend of mine and ask him for a review of the restaurant? Because if I go to the restaurant and I don't find the food well, that's going to be really bad. I'm going to lose my money also. It's not only about the money, it's about the fact that I love going outside and going to restaurants. So let's talk to that friend of mine, take a review. Right. So in the same way, when this decision boundary is getting created, a review or a reference, okay, will be taken, okay, taken from the support vectors. The support vectors. You can try to understand the mathematics like this. There's a lot of math behind it. We are intentionally keeping the math because if we are able to showcase that we are able to implement SVM, that is more important than knowing the mathematical formula, right? I can share you links, and I'm also going to share you links where a lot of mathematical formulas will be there. So that is not an issue. Okay, so that will be shared. But then the most important thing is we should know why we are doing this, right? So the first thing that we see over here. Hi Hitesh, can you hear us? Hello. Okay, I can see a chat. No, no, no problem. Why are you apologizing? No, no, it's fine. It's fine. We will anyways have the recording, right? It's fine. So, what I was saying is related to the support vector. So, the support vectors will be my friends, the references. So, I go to my friends to ask them for the reviews of the restaurants, right? So, I'll go to these points and see how good or how bad my decision boundary is. If let's say these two are falling on top of the edges or the margins, and these two are also falling on top of the margins, which is okay. The rest of the points should be as far as I can, or this should give me, in other words, these 4 points should give me an idea how far the rest of the points are. If that is the case, then I can say that okay, I was able to create a hyperplane, in this case this green line, which is the hyperplane, right, this plane over here, which can help me clearly bifurcate between one class while the other. Because if that is not the case, then my classification report will not be good, my confusion matrix will not be good. If I have a balanced kind of a data, my balance of the data will not be good, and so on, right? So that is going to be a problem. So this is what the idea behind it is. I hope we all got the point. The video of the last session is also there. You can look into it, and you can look into the recording of the session also later on. The main thing over here is this one, point of view. Change the point of view using a technique which is known as kernel trick. The moment you change the point of view from 2D to ND, by the way, this example which I took is only for 3D. In real life, it will be n dimensions. We cannot visualize anything more than 3 dimensions as human beings. That is the reason why we are limiting ourselves to a very, very easy example like two classes, and it is represented by x's and zeros, and we are then transforming our 2D representation to 3D representation by creating what? By creating this third field, this third feature is z, which is some function of f1 and f2. I may or may not necessarily define this function, but you can say, okay, this is just a mathematical function to represent my data as already represented by the features f1 and f2 in a higher order. So a higher order function, if you remember school level math, the basic function, if y is equal to x plus b, I can try to, let's say there is one more equation y, one is this one, and I have a different equation y2, then x square plus bx plus c, this equation is of a higher order, right? And this equation will be of order 0. This is of order 1, right? This is how it goes. I think this is order 1 and this is order 2. I think I made a mistake there. This should be uh, this one should be order 1 and this one should be order 2, right? But clearly, irrespective of, even if this representation of mine is wrong, you can clearly see there is a squared term over here. So I'm just changing the scale, right? The scale of the data, right? So I have a question here. So the question is, for real life problems, will there always be a hyperplane even if we keep on going in the higher order? Yes, for all the real life cases, Rohi, whenever we are doing SVMs, right? And this is why SVMs is considered to be very, very powerful by any analyst. So if you go to any data scientist, they'll usually go to SVM at the first place. The moment you tell them that the data is complex, or the moment you tell them that the data has a lot of dimensions, especially they will go to SVM. So I'll just tell you, I think this part is clear. So let me just remove the drawings. I'll tell you two major cases, or cases where to use SVM, right? So I'm going to say SVM usage. So SVM usage is very high. Let's say if I have a data set which has features x1, x2 until x of d. So I have d-dimensional data, right? I have a data set which is d-dimensional. If this dimension d is very high, right? If this dimension d is very high, this is actually a great news, or you can say a very good news. We are at the right track. We must use SVM, because when d is very high, when I have a very high dimensional data, other than SVM, if you note the other algorithms that we have seen until now, right? Nobody, absolutely nobody created that new variable fn, f1, f2 until f of d, right? So SVM is the only machine learning algorithm where we were able to create this z, and that's the reason why, irrespective of what d is, let's say I have a data, I'm going to take an use case now. Let's say that use case has only 30 features. Doesn't matter. Even if it has 300 features, later when we talk about deep learning, right? I also plan to cover deep learning to some extent. So when we go towards deep learning, there will be things related to image processing. Okay. So there will be things related to image processing. Okay. So if we have things related to image processing, SVM is actually used in one such case related to image processing, which is also known as a regional convolutional neural network. We are going to talk about it later on. Please don't take this seriously right now. We may not know what this is, so let me just cross it out. But SVM has variety of applications, especially where D is very high. This is not to say that you cannot apply SVM where D is small, but SVM usage is more important. Case number 1, where D is high, and case number 2, where you have complex data. Complex data in the sense you cannot simply represent the data in a format like this. So there is no direct relationship between X and Y. Had it been the case, there is a direct relationship. In any two-dimensional plotting, you can clearly plot the data and see if there is any clear view of the bifurcation. For example, I know that I can do pair plotting, right? I know that I can do pair plotting when it comes to SNS or the Seaborn library which we have, right? In case of pair plotting, let's say you're looking at a graph which is something like this, and you are looking at two features, F1 and F2, and you are looking at data which is able to bifurcate the target, right? The target classes like this. If this is the case, then you don't have a complex data here. This is very simple, right? You are able to see the data very easily. You are able to see the bifurcation between class A and class B very easily. Basis these two features, which means if this is the case for all of the features F1, F2 until F of D, right? Then you do not need anything as complex as SVM, right? But in that case, SVM is also going to work. I'm not saying that it is not going to work, but then it will be like trying to kill a mosquito with an AK-47, right? You don't need it. So if the data is really complex, the relationship between features and target is complex, then people tend to go to SVMs. Now comes the problem. So these are pros. These are very good. These are good news. This is why we are trying to learn SVM. Let's look into cons also. There is one major con. I'm not going to talk about many cons, right? If you go to any good website, I'm going to tell you a good website, machine learning mastery. So this is one good blog. From here, the person who runs this blog is Jason Brownlee, right? He himself is a PhD, but the way he writes things is really very easy. So if you want to know a detailed, 5-point, 10-point list of cons, you can go there. You will find it. Or I will also share it on to onto our portal, right? But then the major con is not with D, but with N. So what I mean by N is the number of observations, right? Why I'm saying this is because let's say this Z guy over here. Okay? This Z guy over here is actually doing a cubic function. Okay, of all of the features F1, F2 until F of D. Because this is a kind of a linear representation, D being equal to 300 is still okay. But imagine if I have N is equal to 1 million. If I have number of rows in my data equal to 1 million, then this is a problem, because for each and every row, for each and every feature, I'll have to make the calculation. And that is the reason why if number of observations is within acceptable limits, let's say 70,000 is a very small data. These days, 70,000 is nothing, right? Even let's say 100,000, this is okay. Even I will go up to 300,000 or 400,000. This is also okay. But the moment it is like 900,000, I'll start to worry, right? Unless I have very good infrastructure. If I have very good infrastructure, like I have CPUs and GPUs and so on, it's okay, right? In that case, it is okay. Just like I mentioned GPU, let me quickly tell you also, because we are using sklearn, sklearn does not use GPU by default. I don't know if they have done some recent changes, but the version that I am using in my office in the production environment, it does not use GPU. So I'm under the impression sklearn does not support GPU, which means if you want to do anything with the graphics processing unit or graphical processing unit, which is most or more often than not used for the deep learning areas, you may need to use some other library like, let's say, TensorFlow to implement SVMs, or we may have to hand code it. So these are the cases where you can say that SVM can be used. Until this point in time, friends, any question? Any doubts? Let me see. No. Okay. 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 Let me quickly see. Okay, I see Hitesh has dropped. Okay, no problem. So let me do one thing. Import OS and os.list dir. I'm just going to look at my directory. I do have a data set. I have two data sets. I'll go through the wine quality data set first, and then we'll look into the other data set related to admission. So I'm going to say wine is equal to, okay, so I've not import pandas as PD. So this is where we look into this use case. And the use case is specifically, I think we have used this data earlier also, but this is just a good example to show you how SVM works, right? Or how we are able to find out if this is really a good use case for SVM or not. So wine is equal to pd.read CSV wine quality read, and I can say wine.head, and I should be able to see the data. This is very good. I can see the data. It is already given in kind of a numerical format. And what I need to find out, I believe, is the quality. Let me just quickly look into it. Wine quality. This should be my target variable. Let me take a value counts. So this is my target variable. Okay, this is a multi-class classification problem, and I have imbalanced data also. So I'm going to show you one technique by means of which we can take care of imbalances in the data. Okay, I'm going to use the technique also. But let's try to look at the data first. So I'm going to do a describe, and I also use another way to do the describe, which is like doing a transformation. So I do a describe.t and it is going to transform. So here, let's try to see what is happening. Okay, so let me just admit this. I think it dropped off. So let me just, okay, so let me take another color and okay, so count is okay. I'm going to look into the count later on to find out if there are any nulls in the data. Okay, because I have not run the info command, right? So I don't know whether this is the total number of rows, but it seems there are no missing values because these all are the same, right? So this is kind of a hint that I don't have any missing value. But let's look at the mean as a start. So the average, so I'll have to read everything like this now on this side. So if I look at fixed acidity, 75% is 9.2, max is 15.9, 75 and 50% is quite close to each other. I'll not say exactly close. The mean is 8.31, which is quite close to 9.20. This means the distribution may look something like this. So it will be a bit of right skewedness will be there, right? Not entirely normally distributed, but I don't think much outliers are there. But yes, this guy over here, total sulfur dioxide, this has outliers because 75% of the data falls under the value 62 of its scale. We don't know its scale. We should know its scale, but this value is really high. And if you look at the average, this average is not entirely close to the 75th percentile also. So this is going to look like a distribution like this, right? So there are outliers in here. Rest cases, I don't see much of an outlier. Other than this, in case of sulfates also there can be. This 0.73, this is 2. And that's okay. I think that is acceptable. Yes, the residual sugar. This is where I have outliers, 2.6 and 15. Now I'm going to tell you something which is not going to sound really good. The time we have wasted in finding outliers is wrong if you have already pre-planned to use SVM. If you're looking at SVM by the design, by the architecture, you don't need to look into outliers. This does not mean you don't have to scale the data. The scaling of the data is not only to treat outliers or their effects to some extent, it is also to bring the data into a certain scale, right? It is to bring the data into a manageable scale so that my math, okay, whatever math I'm going to do on top of the data becomes fast. Okay, that's a very important reason of doing scaling. Okay, scaling, for example, standard scaling. We are going to do standard scaling here. Okay, standard scaler is something which I always prefer doing because it tries to convert the data into a normal distribution, right? Where mu is equal to 0, standard deviation sigma is equal to 1, right? So this is uh, one reason why, or two reasons why we do scaling. But here in case of SVM, because we are already going to create this kind of third or fourth or fifth variables in higher order dimensions, using all the features, it doesn't matter whether I have outliers in the data or not because SVMs will be very robust. This you can also note as a pro or an advantage of SVMs. It will be very robust when it comes to outliers because it doesn't matter. I'm anyways going to represent it in higher dimensions using what? Using the kernel trick, right? So that's why it's going to be okay. It's not a drastically bad thing to have outliers, which means SVM is very good when I have genuine outliers, right? That's the hint. So if let's say example given, I have a use case which belongs to my office or my team or let's say my department where I have 500 employees. I'm trying to do some predictive modeling on these 500 employees. Obviously, at least 30 of them will be freshers, right? Who have just joined in the year 2021, let's say, fresh out of the colleges, at least. And there will be at least one person who is my lead or who is my head, right? And this head guy is going to have 30 plus years of IT experience, and these guys are going to have 0 years, right? And there will be a difference in the salary also. So obviously, this head guy over here is an outlier, right? But he's a genuine outlier. If I'm really going to do an analysis which is applicable on all the 500 people, I cannot say he's an outlier. Let's get rid of it. It's just one row out of 500 rows. No, that is not what we do in the industry. You have to use other ways like scaling. You can't just drop the rows like that, right? So keeping that in mind, I don't see anything majorly bad over here. Let's go ahead. Let's try to verify that how many rows were there. So wine dot info. Let's see. Yeah, I was right. Everything is already into numeric format, and 1599 is the total number of rows. Very good. Now what I'm going to do is that from sklearn dot uh, preprocessing import train. No, sorry, it is inside model selection. Sorry, my bad. Import train test split, and I would have to first of all divide x and y. So you know the process, right? So x is my data, which is wine, and I'm going to say wine dot drop. I'm going to say quality. If there are any doubts, especially for you, Hitesh, please ping on the chat window. I think you will have option to unmute yourself also, right? So please ask if you have any doubts. Uh, the second is going to be uh, wine and quality. So I've just taken X and Y. Let me just increase the number of cells. I've just taken X and Y. Now what I'm going to do, uh, I have X and Y. I have to create the training and the testing sets. Okay. So I'll create them first. X train, X test, Y train, and Y test is equal to train test split X comma Y test size is equal to 0.3, let's say, and the random state is equal to 0.4, right? So once I 0.4 can, okay. Oh, sorry, extremely sorry. It has to be an integer. Okay, now what we are going to do from sklearn.preprocessing import standard scaler. Okay, I'm going to scale my data, but there is something which I'm sure you are already aware. We will fit transform the training data, but not the testing data. So what I mean by that is I'm going to x train scaled is equal to um, no, this is wrong. I'm sorry. SC is equal to standard scaler. I'm going to create an object first, and then I'm going to say fit transform on x train. Okay, and I can also say x train, sorry, x test scaled is going to be SC fit and X test. And the reason why we are doing this is because if I do fit transform on both, right, then the statistical distribution of both the training and the testing data becomes the same. And there is no statistical difference left now between the training and the testing data, which means I'll result into a situation where I am going to have a leakage problem. Leakage problem is where I'm trying to feed a data to my model to test its validity, which is statistically almost similar to the data on which I have trained it, right? This will be a problem. Hence, I'm not going to do that. Instead, now I have my Y data. I have not scaled it. I don't need to because there's a classification problem. I don't have to do that. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to look at my data first once, and then I will go ahead further. I should have done that earlier. So let me just look into my data first. So wine.core, I'm going to say the first thing I do. Now, this is not really that big kind of a data set that I cannot find things out of it. Only by looking at it, I should be able to find things out of it. Let's try to find things. Minus 0.55. Volatile acidity and citric acid, these are multicollinear variables, right? Even more than that, fixed acidity and citric acid, this has very good intercorrelations. Even fixed acidity has very good intercorrelation between along with the density, right? Now let's look at quality. If I only concentrate on quality, there is a negative relationship with volatile acidity, positive relationship with citric acid. Okay, anything else? Anything else? Anything else? Anything else here? Yeah. Here I have a good relationship with alcohol. Obviously, a wine is going to be better if I have higher alcohol, right? So the quality will be better if I have higher percentage of alcohol, right? But then there are other factors also which are either negatively, volatile acidity is negatively affecting it, and citric acid is positively affecting it, right? So we have that kind of a scenario also. But there is a multicollinearity problem. Here I see multicollinearity. Here I see multicollinearity. Okay. Any place else, I see some form of multicollinearity here, some form here. This is a good sign of, let's say, multicollinearity, right? But I may or may not be really bothered about it because multicollinearity is a problem, is a genuine problem, irrespective of whether there is a regression issue or there is a classification issue, right? Usually people think that it is more of a problem with the regression use case. That's not the case. It's also a problem with the classification use case also, right? It's actually a problem with the classification also. Multicollinearity is definitely a problem, but as of now, as part of this use case, I need to know the data. Okay, I need to know the data or the data dictionary, which I don't know. I simply imported the data, right? If you look at my code, I just imported the data. I've not looked into the dictionary or the description of the data. So I am not a subject matter expert. If I'm not a subject matter expert, I can't choose if I need to keep fixed acidity or citric acid. Right now, one thing I can do is citric acid. If you look at it, citric acid is more positively correlated, okay, with quality. It is more positively correlated with quality, right? Which means that if I get rid of citric acid, it may well be a problem, uh, right? It may well be a problem when I'm going to do the modeling, because then my model may not be as good as I expect it to be. It may not be able to find good relationships. In that case, what I can do is rather than dropping citric acid, I can try to drop citric acid is related to fixed acidity, right? So I can drop this feature, fixed acidity, from my data. Okay, I can drop this feature from my data, right? Because these two are intercorrelated with each other. Anything else which is as high as this? Yes, this one, right? pH and citric acid. So let's look at what is the effect of pH on my quality. It is very less. I can drop pH. So I'm going to say I'm going to drop pH, and I'm going to drop fixed acidity. Fixed acidity I'm going to drop. Anything else? Let me just quickly see. So this is the diagonal. I can do this using a heat map also, friends. But if you are habituated looking at the numbers, you don't need a heat map. The next thing is the density. So in this case, a residual sugar and density are intercorrelated, right? But none of them, at least residual sugar is not good with respect to the quality. What about the density? Density has kind of a minus relationship. Okay, let me keep density and the residual sugar can be dropped, right? So this kind of a decision making we can take, right? I'm not going to do this. I'm just showing this as an example. This is the way you may want to. This is optional, okay? You may want to choose the features or which you would like to drop. But if you're going to drop features, please ensure you have read the description or you have a person who has very good domain knowledge. If you don't have that knowledge, please get hold of a person who does, and you should learn that, or otherwise this will become a problem, right? So as of now, because I'm not a domain expert, I'm not going to do any dropping, right? I'm not going to drop anything, right? But let's do something else. Import matplotlib pyplot as plt, uh, matplotlib inline, and import seaborn as this. You can try to do pair plotting. That's not going to be an issue. So PLT dot figure fixed size is equal to 12 comma 11. Let's 12 comma 10, and send as a dot pair plot wine. The hue is going to be quality, and I'm going to set PLT dot. Okay, this will take some time, so let's wait. Any questions, friends, in the meanwhile? Any doubts? Give me 1 minute. I've just paused the screen share. Give me 1 minute. Okay. Yeah. Now you see the problem here. SVM, do you think it is a good thing on top of this? Because I think in any cases, SVM can be justified as a good model. If you look at the output here, I have to look at a few things which are really very important. Let me just take my pen and try to explain this. Look at these kind of, let's say, distributions. You can clearly see each and every color is representing one class over here, right? That's the objective, but they are really overlapping, right? They are very much coagulated with each other, which means there is some relationship, there may be, right? But it is coagulated, right? There is a lot of coagulation. Even in this case, there is a lot of coagulation. In this case also, irrespective of the fact that this is like right skewed, there is a lot of coagulation. So the coagulation of the data is there. It is there. So the bifurcation is not really very clear, right? I mean, it is really not clearly distinguishable as to which class belongs to what only by looking at this kind of pair plotting, right? So it's not really clear. So this gives you some hint. Okay, this gives you some hint that yes, okay, we are going to select SVM, and SVM is going to be good use case for us because there is a lot of complexity within the data. Even the data size is not that big. I'm not looking into the number of the columns. I'm looking into the number of rows. Right? So the data size is also manageable. So let's try to fit the model. So I think from sklearn dot SVC, let me just quickly look into sklearn dot SVC SVM. Yeah, it is SVM import SVC. sklearn SVM. I think this is in small. Yeah. So when it comes to sklearn, it is really easy. We know how we need to do that. So SVC underscore one is going to be my first model. So I'm going to say SVC. I'm just going to create an object of it, and then I'm going to say SVC -1 dot fit explain scaled y thin. Right, I have got my model. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to take ypred1, and I'm going to do that SVC underscore one dot predict, and I'm going to pass the x paste scale. Right. So now this is going to be an error. Float must be a y. Uh, this is a problem. Float argument must be a string or a number, not standard scalar. But this is not a standard scalar item, my friend. Um, type x. Hmm. I believe I'll have to convert this. I will have to give me 1 minute. Let me just see. X is no, I think what I have done as a mistake is that I need to do only transformation, and I've done a fit also. So let me just change this. I believe that is the mistake that I have done. It should not be fit, it should be transformed, right? So now it should work. Let's see. Yeah, it has worked now. So from that was a very, very silly mistake, friends. I apologize. I should have done only transformations, not a fit. From sklearn.metrics, import classification report, confusion matrix, accuracy score. And here I'm going to say print classification report, ypred1, y test. Now the problem here is we don't have a very good model. That is it. The thing why that is the case is because out of the box SVC and because of class imbalance, there is a lot of problem. So we really don't have a very good model over here. We need to improve that. Okay, but let's look at the confusion matrix also. Y red 1 y test. And here also I could see there are misclassifications. Not everything is on the diagonal. For some of the classes, nothing is really classified, right? Especially for the second class. I believe that is class 4. Right? So that is not good. If I look at the accuracy score also, I'm sure not going to be very good, right? See, it is really not good. So out of the box, it did not work well. Okay, let's see how we can improve it, but we are going to do that by the next session. So we will continue from tomorrow. We will look into how to improve these two things we are going to look into tomorrow. The first thing will be how to improve the model. Now we know how to do that. We can do k-fold. That's one way. And I'm going to use grid search cross validator. So that's two ways in which I'm going to improve. The second way I'm going to improve, I'm going to show you a library or an application on a Smote. And by means of Smote, I'm going to do upsampling. Okay, I'm going to do upsampling so that I can take care of this class imbalance problem. Okay, because we have a class imbalance problem that is affecting my data. I'm going to take care of that and then I'm going to proceed. Okay. In the meanwhile, friends, any questions? Any questions? Any doubts? No. Sorry, Rohi, you were saying something.
No questions.
Thank you. Okay, great. Thank you, Hitesh. Thank you so much. Okay, friends, then let's meet, let's say tomorrow, same time.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Bhomik.
See you tomorrow. Good night.
Good night.